It's no secret that the Bible has laws regulating a form of slavery. How do we make sense of these laws in light of the Bible's overall theme of freedom? God introduced himself to his people at Mount Sinai as the one who brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. In other words, God revealed himself as the liberator of slaves. He wanted to be known and recognized first and foremost as a God who wants his people to be free. This theme is carried into the New Testament. Yeshua said that God's end-time activity, which includes freeing the oppressed, was inaugurated in his own ministry. He is the Son who frees the sinner from their slavery. The Apostle Paul, in combating those who taught a false gospel, gave a direct command to, quote, not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Believers are not to be slaves to men. The Bible's theme of freedom from slavery has dramatically impacted the world we live in today. It's nearly universally acknowledged that humans ought to be free and that slavery is evil. The committee who drafted the United States Declaration of Independence recognized that freedom is something God desires. They declared life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to be human rights endowed to us by the Creator. It was on the basis of these founding ideals that Americans eventually abolished slavery and have fought for the freedom and equal rights of everyone. With that in mind, it's no secret that the Bible has laws regulating a form of slavery. How do we make sense of these laws in light of the Bible's overall theme of freedom? If God is all about setting the captives free, why didn't he just abolish slavery in the Torah? How do we resolve this tension within the biblical text? First, biblical slavery is not what you might think. The Torah actually does prohibit the type of slavery we often think of today. That is, it prohibits, quote, what became the African slave trade and all institutions of slavery based on kidnapping. There are no laws allowing people to enslave men and women against their will to be bought and sold as property. In fact, the Torah prescribes the death penalty for anyone who does such a thing. What the Bible does allow for is a type of indentured servitude. Men and women, usually to pay off debts or get out of extreme poverty, could voluntarily become a slave or a servant for a set time. The Torah's slavery regulations were quite radical in the ancient world. Israelite slaves were to be freed in the 7th year unless they chose to stay. Even if they hadn't paid off their debts by the 7th year, the Torah required their release anyway and that their debts be forgiven. Moreover, if a slave decided to flee for any reason, the Torah protected them and did not permit them to be returned. The Torah also afforded slaves protections against abuse. Now, some critics might point to some inconsistencies in the Torah's regulations regarding foreign slaves, that is, non-Israelite slaves, like what we see in Leviticus 25. These regulations seem to refer to foreign slaves as a literal property that can be passed to one's children as permanent possessions. However, some contextual considerations might help us resolve some of these concerns. First, again, the Torah prohibited people from being bought and sold against their will. So whatever arrangement Leviticus 25, 44 through 46 permitted regarding foreign slaves was voluntary. Second, while non-Israelites were not automatically released in the 7th year, Leviticus 25:47 states that the strangers living within Israel could become rich. In other words, a foreign slave could eventually get out of poverty, become self-sustaining, and thus wouldn't have to be a slave anymore. While foreigners in Israel could serve for life, serving multiple generations if they wanted, just like an Israelite slave could, the Torah didn't require that. Third, except for automatic debt cancellation in the 7th year, Foreign slaves were afforded the same protections and benefits as Israelite slaves, including protection if they decided to leave at any time. But what about the fact that the text refers to these foreign slaves as property and possessions? Well, the scholar J. Sklar gives us some insight regarding this type of language. In English, we regularly use commercial language to describe people when the context is commercial. For example, trading a player to another team, as one might trade a stock, or transferring an employee to another location, as one might transfer money. We do not use this language because we view the people involved as less than human. We use it because it accurately describes their circumstances in a given commercial context. To say that servants are property or inherited is not to put them on the level of furniture any more than to say a sports star is traded puts him on the level of a stock. So, biblical slavery, while certainly not ideal, was nothing like what we often think of today as slavery. It was a voluntary 6-year maximum arrangement. While slaves in Israel were in a lower social class, in contrast to other ancient law codes, the Torah regarded slaves as fully human, requiring punishment for mistreating them. The Torah also granted Israelite slaves freedom every 7th year. Additionally, a slave could flee any time, which proves that one was a slave voluntarily, as they were always free to leave. Number 2. The Torah's slavery laws uphold human equality, ultimately undermining slavery. The second way that we can make sense of biblical slavery is by recognizing the distinction between what the scholar Charles E.B. Cranfield called, quote, those elements of the Old Testament law which set forth the perfect will of God, and, quote, those elements which, taking into account the fact of men's sinfulness, indicate not God's perfect absolute will, but his will in response to the circumstances brought about by human sin. Some laws are not ideal, but given to address the realities of our fallen world. Yeshua taught this principle when he said of the laws permitting divorce, from the beginning it was not so. Divorce is not God's perfect will, but a concession to human frailty. In the same way, I think Scripture is clear that the laws governing slavery do not represent God's perfect will, but his response to the realities of our fallen world. I unpack this more fully in my book, Is God a Misogynist? But to establish this, we need to go back to the beginning before sin entered God's good creation. What do we find in the beginning? We see human value and equality. God created humans in his image. This is a unique status that applies to all humans and emphasizes their intrinsic moral worth. You'll notice there is no slavery in the beginning. That occurs after sin enters God's creation. After the fall, God lovingly condescends to deal with humans in their fallen state while pointing them back toward the creation ideal as much as possible. With respect to ancient Israel, God met them where they were and gradually led them toward a better way through the values expressed in the Torah. So instead of prohibiting man-made societal systems like slavery outright, which probably wouldn't have been very effective considering how deeply ingrained these social structures were in the ancient world, God permitted these structures and regulated them on the basis of human value and equality. To be clear, we must not consider God's instructions found within the framework of these man-made structures to be endorsements of the structures themselves. Through God's regulations, he sets a trajectory back to the creation ideal. God's laws governing slavery established barriers against mistreating slaves, which highlighted their human dignity. But more than that, God's laws actually undermined the institution of slavery itself, pointing toward the ideal of human equality. For instance, slaves, just like free people, are given Sabbath rest, a weekly memorial of creation and the ideal world God intends for all humans. Slaves are invited to partake in the Passover, a memorial of deliverance from slavery. The Torah repeatedly reminds Israel that they too were once slaves in Egypt and must therefore treat all people, including the stranger residing among them, with dignity and love. The Torah refers to slaves as your brothers. Finally, the Torah commands us to love your neighbor as yourself, emphasizing human equality. So the entire basis of the Torah is the declaration that God freed us from slavery. The Torah upholds slaves as fully human and worthy of dignity, love, and freedom. So while God did permit a form of slavery, He set a foundation in the Torah that would eventually lead to the abolishment of slavery. When we get to the New Testament, we see the Torah's principles of human equality being embraced wholeheartedly. Paul declares that all followers of the Messiah, whether slave or free, they share in the gift of God's love and grace equally, according to Galatians 3 and Colossians 3. The gospel makes the master-slave relationship entirely irrelevant because Messiah's followers, all of them, are equal members of God's covenant family regardless of their economic or social status. It was on the basis of this creation ideal that Paul even goes so far as to boldly request that his friend Philemon reconcile with his runaway slave and receive him back, quote, no longer as a slave, but as a beloved brother. In conclusion, the Bible teaches that all mankind is made in God's image and worthy of dignity. God reveals Himself as a liberator of slaves. The Torah does not allow for any type of slavery based on kidnapping. The Torah did allow for a heavily regulated form of slavery on a temporary and voluntary basis. The Torah's regulations of the form of slavery it allowed not only served to protect slaves, but also established a trajectory toward the ideal of human equality. Ultimately, we morally reject slavery today because we agree with the values expressed in the Torah. I hope this video was helpful in wrapping our minds around this difficult topic of slavery in the Bible. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so that you'll know when new content like this is released. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Blessings and shalom.